Prince of Persia is back, and it's got a whole new look, wildly different gameplay, and the team has pretty much hit reset on everything we know about the franchise. But is that a good thing or not? My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and today, after going hands-on with Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, I think it's safe to say this game has some insane potential. So for full transparency, I recently took part in a virtual Ubisoft event. I got to spend about 3 hours with the game exploring the tutorial area, as well as the beginning sections of Mount Kaf. I had a personal tour guide with me that just sort of sat back and watched as I played, answering any questions I might have had. To be honest, it was one of the most open pre-launch experiences I've ever been a part of, and if you've been following our channel for any stretch of time, you'd know that we're always looking to see how transparent developers are with their games ahead of launch. In the case of Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, sure, we only had 3 hours, but I had total freedom within that time limit. With that in mind, here's the headlines, my big takeaways if you will. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown has the potential to be one of the best side-scrollers of 2024. It's a Metroidvania that feels on par with games like Dead Cells or Hollow Knight, but it's unclear if it stands up to that standard. There's a great blend of storytelling and action woven throughout the experience, even early on. The combat is snappy and fun, even when dealing with some virtual session lag. The bosses and mini-bosses are well designed and tuned harder than I expected, and the Ubisoft Montpellier team is clearly pulling from years of Rayman experience. If you get nothing else out of this video, that's what I walked away from my session with, a solid understanding of the game's structure, combat, and systems that make The Lost Crown what it is. But let's dial it back to the very beginning so I can share a bit more about the game. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, as far as I can tell, is a completely new adventure. You play as Sargon, a Persian immortal, one of a select few elite soldiers that make up the fabled group. Your task, as you come to find out almost immediately in the game, is to save Persia's prince after he's kidnapped from the castle. That's pretty much the entire setup, and while the first half hour of the game is mostly dedicated to story and gameplay basics, once you get past that, the game opens wide up. I will say, from a storytelling point of view, it was really cool to see Prince of Persia portrayed in a different way. From the world to the characters themselves, the stylings felt so different that it immediately helps The Lost Crown feel like a different game than, say, the Prince of Persia of the past. I would even go so far as to say the semi-realistic stylization of the game's graphics gives the developers a lot more freedom to push the gameplay in a much more mythical direction. That's the second thing I noticed, that The Lost Crown was truly fantastical. It wasn't just soldiers and guards that you're fighting, but mythical creatures, and to step into Persian mythology is something I believe will help win over fans. Just in my short 3-hour window, I saw a whole host of enemies, almost none of which were traditional in nature outside of the tutorial zone. The array of creatures and beasts was honestly impressive, made better by the world I was beginning to explore. The Lost Crown takes place on Mount Kaf, a wondrous and mysterious place many believe is cursed. Obviously, with just a couple hours under my belt, I don't know the full scale of the game, but I can tell you my gut says it's pretty big. Much like Hollow Knight or Ori and the Will of the Wisps, Prince of Persia is a handcrafted game. Every aspect of every map tile is handcrafted, and as far as I could tell, there were no random or procedurally generated elements of the experience. Once I left the tutorial area, I spent the next 2+ hours just exploring Mount Kaf, following my instinct wherever that took me. Like some of the more traditional Metroidvania games, the goal is to explore, deduce, and problem solve, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the game based on what I experienced. There's a healthy blend of fighting and puzzle solving, and sometimes they bleed together. For example, one great puzzle moment was in the sewers, where I had to figure out how to manipulate a water wheel to open up a blocked door. No hints, no real guidance, I just had to observe the world and experiment. That's exactly what draws me into games like this, and while there is a guided mode, it certainly doesn't reveal all of the secrets of the game. Truth be told, I had this really crystallizing moment where, midway through my play session, I had to physically stop and collect my thoughts because my brain kept pulling me in a bunch of different directions, and that's all because of the solid exploration element of the game. You'll enter a hub room with multiple doors and exit points. You start by following a pathway and then realize 10 minutes have gone by and you're 10 rooms away from where you started. It's a really cool experience, and quite honestly what I love about this genre when done correctly. It's not just about the combat, which is great too, you just wait, but the aspect of piecing together a world that you explore one room at a time, well, that's a thing of beauty. Now in terms of the combat, here again I think the game does get it right, or at least what I experienced is on the right track. For starters, every enemy is visually distinct and has a clear moveset. That is such a big aspect of these types of games, especially when they start throwing multiple enemies at you. The game definitely doesn't give you a lot of room for error, especially in the early game. I was playing on the equivalent of a hard difficulty, and I swear I could only take 2 or 3 hits before I died and had to reset. Sometimes you'll die and be right near a checkpoint. Other times you'll be far enough away that you honestly feel defeated in that moment. Again, I don't think the game is really out there to hold the player's hand, especially on the harder difficulties. The same could be said for some of the elite enemies and boss encounters, which were really well designed and pretty tightly tuned. One of the first mini-bosses you fight only has 3 or 4 moves, but the way everything ties together really keeps you on your toes, and I'm not ashamed to admit it took me a dozen attempts before it finally clicked. I personally liked that aspect of the game, and it almost gave me the same satisfaction of defeating a boss in a Souls game. Where the Lost Crown does deviate a bit from other games in the genre is with your own actions. You control Sargon, a Persian warrior, and at the start you have a very basic set of moves, like light and heavy attack, the ability to jump and attack, pretty standard stuff. Eventually you unlock the ability to use special attacks, and these are all tied to a unique resource that you build up as you land attacks on enemies and successfully parry incoming blows. I honestly tried to master the parry technique as soon as I could, because I could just tell it was going to be a vital part of the game. The window is tight, but I managed to make it work more times than not, even with some slight virtual session lag. As you build up your resource, you'll reach different thresholds, and you can unleash powerful abilities that range from dealing massive damage to summoning a healing zone on the ground for a limited amount of time. I only got to experience 2 of these, but it seems like we'll unlock quite a few throughout our time with the game. I found these to be almost essential to my combat. I was able to weave them seamlessly into my actions, which isn't always the case with special abilities. Sometimes you feel like you have to use them. Other times they just become second nature, and in this case it's the latter. The combat itself isn't the snappiest when compared to other games in the genre, but it is smooth. There's a little more weight behind your actions, and while the game still maintains a bit of that classic side-scroller movement that's a bit floaty and arcadey, I felt it added just a slight bit of realism that helped the action feel more impactful. If there's one element of the game that I really didn't get a good sense for as I wrapped up my session, it's progression. And that's a pretty big deal because, in my mind, that's the carrot on the end of the stick driving the experience forward. I did get a taste for some of the power-up systems that are clearly important to the game, such as the amulet system that provides various buffs to Sargon, but beyond that, I didn't really get a sense for how the game would continue to elevate the player experience. To be clear, I don't expect to see all of those things within the first 3 hours of a game like this, and while I did get some brief glimpses of systems that would eventually open up my progression later on, I just didn't have the exposure to them during this session. This is something we'll be really focused on when we inevitably review the game because I want to know that the experience is going to evolve throughout the journey. There's one more thing I wanted to address, and that's something synonymous with Prince of Persia: time. Again, I just didn't get to see enough of this element of the game in my first 3 hours to really comment on it. It's definitely there, that's for sure, but as far as how it impacts the gameplay experience, I just can't say with any authority. My only real exposure to sort of time magic, for lack of a better term, was some platforming elements. It's all wrapped up in the curse engulfing Mount Kaf, but how that plays out long term, just not sure. Again, this is something we'll be absolutely keeping an eye on, especially because it's such a defining element of previous Prince of Persia games. As I said goodbye to my session guide and closed out the game, there was really only one thing that was running through my mind: that Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown has huge potential. It was a damn fun 3 hours, and I could have easily played another 6 if I wasn't forced to stop. I can't say I'm surprised, given that the team behind the game has a long history with side-scrollers, and while Rayman's popularity has certainly declined, the quality of the game has always been solid. For that same team to get a crack at a modern Metroidvania with a franchise like Prince of Persia, well, that, my friends, has all the potential in the world. We hope you all enjoyed this first look at Ubisoft's upcoming game, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. Let us know what you think about the game in the comments section below. I know there are some die-hard Prince of Persia fans out there, so what do you think about the change in perspective and everything that you've seen so far? If you like what you see and you're excited about the game, do me a solid, hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing. The plan is to bring you all a full review right before launch, so keep it right here and never miss a thing. Of course, you can join us on Discord if you want to hang out with the team, talk about great games, and enter for your chance to win tons of free giveaways going on all the time. And as always, that link is below. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching and play on.